have a tendency to become very enthusiastic about my various gardening projects and to go all out. Whether it's converting all my worm bins to flow-through bins, building compost pile after compost pile, or collecting huge quantities of leaves, coffee grounds, and wood chips for the garden. Though I'm also very enthusiastic about the potential of biochar, this is an area where I'm going to do my best to resist my temptation to go all out, at least at first. While there's a lot of anecdotal evidence and some research that support biochar's value as a soil amendment, the scientific research on biochar is still in its infancy and doesn't always support some of the more optimistic claims. As a layman, it's difficult for me to draw any definite conclusions from the scientific research that I've seen. So starting out, I'm going to take it slow, apply relatively small amounts of biochar to the soil, and do my best to learn from experience before going all out. I'll also do my own research by doing side-by-side comparisons of crops planted with and without biochar. I'd also like to hear from you. Have you used biochar in your garden? And if so, were you happy with the results? There are a few potential drawbacks that can occur when biochar is used improperly in the garden. I'll first talk about the potential drawbacks and then how to address them. First, if biochar that hasn't been preloaded with nutrients and moisture is applied to the soil, it can actually inhibit plant growth for as long as a year. It's kind of like putting a dry sponge in a puddle of water. The sponge will quickly soak up the water until it's saturated. Similarly, the pure biochar will soak up both water and nutrients until it's saturated. And where will it get the water and nutrients from? The surrounding soil, of course. So in effect, biochar can rob the soil of its nutrients and moisture, resulting in stunted plant growth. Second, you can also think of biochar as a sponge that attracts and holds the beneficial microbes that are responsible for making soil nutrients available to plants. Pure biochar that hasn't been pre-inoculated with microbes will attract microbes from the surrounding soil. As a result, applying pure biochar to the soil can temporarily deplete surrounding soil of beneficial microbes as they take up residence in the biochar. Third, most biochar is alkaline, which is fine for acidic soils, but adding it to alkaline soils could be a problem. Though my soil is pH neutral, I'm reluctant to add large quantities of biochar and potentially raise the pH above an optimal level. Fortunately, the first two of these potential drawbacks can be addressed by charging biochar, which involves loading biochar with nutrients and inoculating it with microbes before applying it to the soil. This can be achieved by adding biochar to compost, bokashi compost, vermicompost, organic liquid fertilizer, or manure. The charge will be most effective when the charge medium is moist, diverse in nutrients and beneficial organisms, and the charge duration is at least 14 days. After charging biochar, it will be loaded with nutrients and inoculated with beneficial microbes that will help improve soil fertility over time. So returning to the sponge analogy, adding charged biochar to the soil is like adding a wet sponge to a puddle of water. The wet sponge will only add more water to the puddle, and the charged biochar will only add more moisture, more nutrients, and more beneficial microbes to the soil. If you think of the charged biochar as an urban center and the surrounding soil as the suburbs, the urban center will have a large and growing population of microbes and nutrients, but they'll gradually make their way out of the urban center and into the suburbs, leading to an increased population in the suburbs as well. Starting out, I'm going to charge our biochar by adding it to all but one of our worm bins over the winter. The vermicompost with no biochar will be my control when I test the biochar's effectiveness. If by next summer I'm convinced that biochar is improving plant growth, I'll also start adding it to the compost bins. Vermicompost and compost are perfect charge mediums in that they're moist and diverse in nutrients and beneficial microorganisms. Though I won't be measuring the biochar precisely, I plan on adding roughly 1 part biochar to 9 parts food and bedding to our worm bins this winter. I'll add a similar amount to our compost bins in the summer if I decide to continue using biochar. By the time I'm ready to start indoor planting for next spring, the biochar in the vermicompost will be loaded with moisture, nutrients, and beneficial microorganisms. I haven't worked out all the details yet, but to test the biochar, I'll do side-by-side comparisons of plants started in seed mix with no biochar versus plants started in mixes with varying amounts of biochar. I'll also do some side-by-side tests in the garden when I plant in the spring. And despite my enthusiasm for biochar, it will be these test results, not my enthusiasm, that will determine if I continue making and using biochar in the years to come. Well, that's all for now. Thank you very much for watching. And until next time, remember, you can change the world 1 yard at a time.